Hello, welcome back to my channel. Um, Today I just kind of want to talk a little bit about this book, my reading experience of this book. This is The Gate to Women's Country by Sheri Tepper. This is my first book by Sheri Tepper. This book was published in 1988 and I read it in 2025. And I liked it. I liked it a lot. I give this one 4 out of 5 stars. So what is this book about? This is something like a science fiction novel. It is a post-apocalyptic novel set in a future world. I would say a couple of centuries after a particularly devastating nuclear war. And so what happens in this in the present time in this book, which is set in the future, by that time the society is kind of arranged in a particularly interesting way. So what happens to the society is that women and men are generally segregated. Women would live in towns that are collectively named as women's country, and then men would live outside each of these towns as warriors. And so basically their role is to protect and guard these towns from bandits and also any other threats that might endanger the people who live in these towns. Now, this is kind of like in general how men and women are separated. So women who live in this town, some of them are also members of people who govern, who rule, who engage in political activities. So basically in this world, women take on the role of governance. Now, the separation is not completely like very black and white, as in men are all outside the towns and women are all inside the towns. Some men who chose not to be warriors, at certain age they can choose to leave the life of warriors and live with the women in the towns as in the capacity of that is called servitors, where they would perform some services, essential services in the towns, basically. So basically this is kind of like the background of how the society in this novel works. And we follow one particular character who is also the protagonist in this book. Her name is Stavia. She's the daughter of a councilwoman, and when we are introduced to Stavia, she is roughly about the age of, I think, 11, 12, 13 years old. I don't really remember exactly, but she's really young. But she also displays like high level of intelligence, very much a curious girl. And it is through the perspective of Stavia that we learn more about the inner workings of the society, and also basically how things work in women's country. But eventually, as Stavia grows up, she ends up encountering a particularly personal conflict that may sort of threaten the stability of this particular society due to her being the daughter of a councilwoman. And this personal conflict that she's facing also involves her relation with a boy who would eventually, as dictated by the rules in the society, who would eventually become the member of the warriors. So basically we kind of follows the story of Stavia, on how she navigates this personal conflict that may relate to a conspiracy that is brewing among the warriors in order to take over the governance in women's country. And as we follow the story's plot, we see how that unfolds and how it is resolved. But there are also more things beyond that plot, which would kind of lead us to learn more about the history of the society in this book, how things end up becoming that way, and how things could possibly go on, basically. So yeah, in a sense, this book is quite rich in its world building, and there are certain aspects that does feel like holes here and there, but overall I think the way it is presented is adequate enough for me to enjoy the story. Now, another thing that I just kind of forgot to mention is that while most of the present plot deals with the story of Stavia as a young girl growing up into a young woman, and her the conflicts that she has with the boy, and you know all of the machinations that are related to this particular issue. There is also a second timeline that takes place when Stavia is like in her 30s something, and in this particular timeline, Stavia is reenacting. Not reenacting. Stavia is acting in a play, and basically this play is kind of like an adaptation of the story of the Trojan War, but it takes place right after when many of the characters in the Trojan War has died, and much of the women characters in that story, people like Iphigenia, and Cassandra and others are dead, and they are in this world called in this afterlife, and Achilles is also dead. And what happens in that play is basically they just kind of like talking about how this war has ravaged the women in so many ways, and then Achilles is kind of portrayed as a bratty man who is complaining a lot, and basically the existence of this second timeline in this book kind of feels like a nice subtle commentary on how the story unfolds in the main plot of the book. So yeah, there's that detail as well. Now the main thing that kind of goes on in this story and in this novel is that this idea of gender determinism is essentially the basis of this society, where the people in this society, or rather the people who are in charge of making decisions in this society, they believe that men and women are born different ways, and so they are wired towards different things, different traits and characteristics, proclivities and whatnot. So they believe that boys would be born in boys are born into with certain tendencies towards violence, and that's why at the age of 5 they arrange the boys to join the adult soldiers and let them decide if they want to stay as soldiers or not, and whereas girls are ought to remain in the society, and they would eventually learn many different things. They will go to school and all that, and maybe eventually become like people in charge of the governance. So yeah, there is this idea that men are like this, women are like that. Personally, I typically I don't really like seeing, especially in novels, where men are described this way, women women are described that way. It doesn't matter who is described as the bad one or who is the good one. If all men are painted as this way, women are painted that way, it just feels too clumsy to me, and I would tend to not like it. But I was quite surprised that for this book I actually enjoyed how, let's just say how these two factions, these two genders are being portrayed. And I would say it's because it's not 100% black and white. The way this book does it, it also shows that there are some gray areas, especially when it comes to the men's side. It's definitely not that perfect, as in this book seems to think that there is some kind of utopian quality to how the society is run, because as a reader it does feel like the way that this society is managed, like the logistics that have to come with segregating the men and women, and the kinds of activities that they have to engage in order for stuff like procreation can happen. It just feels so complicated, and in that sense there is a kind of dystopian feel attached to it, I think. And I think that part is also quite thought-provoking as well, especially when related to the idea of gender determinism, which is something that I personally don't really agree with. But the way that this book paints it and the way that it sort of merged that by making readers sympathize with the main characters like Stavia, and also other supporting characters who are just kind of like on the same side as Stavia. In short, some of the women characters, or some of the characters who are in the women's country, it kind of allows you to sympathize with these characters, and in a way, not really focusing too much on on the dystopian quality of this society. So I find that is quite interesting. There is a bit of what I consider as some kind of misdirection of the readers. But obviously I also think that there's more to it than that. But I just thought that is just kind of creative. And also I noticed that there is this kind of like undercurrent of I would say feminine frustration just present in this book. You see that especially with how most of the male characters are being described. Like many of them are shown to be violent and prone to this thing called toxic masculinity. And mind you, to me it's not just a buzzword. A lot of people would think of it as it's just a buzzword, but I do feel that much of the male characters in this book practice what is defined as toxic masculinity. and I just like the way that this book just keeps on pissing on the idea of toxic masculinity in general, just really, in a way, in a literary way, just kind of ridiculing uh, um, the actions related to this kind of mindset. And I don't know, I just thought that that's kind of amusing. and in line with this kind of like feminine frustration in this book, you can also see that many of the female characters are drawn in a super sympathetic way, which is kind of like what I mentioned just now, but like how it's easy for readers to sympathize with the female characters and not so much with many of the male characters. There are male characters that you can sympathize with, but not so much with a lot of them. And yeah, it does get kind of obvious sometimes, like women are painted as really good in general and men are painted as really bad, but overall I still find it quite engaging. But I feel like that is probably going to depend on the individual reading the book, of course. Yeah, what else? Yeah, this book has a particularly controversial ending. Judging from what people say in book reviews, there is going to be like a revelation towards the end of this book, which might not sit well with some people. I just thought that that's kind of chaotic. And also another chaotic that happened in this book is a particular action that is being done at the end. And I'm not going to talk about that action, but there is something that feels particularly cathartic about what happens at the end. And if you have read this book, I'm talking about the ending where this large group of people are being, something is being performed on this large group of people. I don't want to give too much spoilers, but I feel that that particular action carried out by a different group of characters to me feel quite chaotic in a cathartic way, and it also acts like a for me, in my opinion, a nice resolution to the conflict that the main character Stavia experiences. Also, just kind of want to add one more thing. This book seems to rub some people the wrong way when it comes to how it treats queerness, and I can see where they come from. I personally think that it kind of makes sense given the context of this book. We have basically the characters who live in this society. They live in a world where electricity is not a thing. Technology has mostly been wiped out as the aftermath of the devastating nuclear war. So much of the knowledge that would have come with, all these technological advances, scientific advances would have been lost as well, including ideas on queerness, gayness, homosexuality, and all that. But yeah, there is a certain idea held by characters in this book about homosexuality that is going to feel kind of off for some people. But it does not occupy like a large part of this book, just a little bit. But yeah, just kind of want to mention that. Anyway, I love this book. I really enjoyed reading it. The first few chapters were kind of boring, but as I continued, it gained momentum, and towards the end, I was like, ooh, 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 you know, it became much more exciting. Anyway, yeah, have you read this book? What do you think about it? And I'm really curious to know, and I wonder if any of you guys have read anything by Sheri Tepper as well. Um, I really like I really like this book. I really like the tone that she uses in here. This kind of like, there's a, there's this kind of like exasperation that just kind of permeates throughout this book, which I think really fits not only with the main topic that this book is talking about, but also with the narrative itself. So I think it kind of works out, it just feels like really coherent. Anyway, that's all I want to talk about this book. Definitely recommend, and I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.